Dear friends and colleagues, I'm delighted to be serving as the coordinator for this panel. We have two speakers, one of them able to come here, and the other one we will have from a distance giving his talk. Our first speaker is Anita Karimi from the Philips University in Marburg. We'll be talking about the role, the importance of cartoons in two critical periods of Iran's modern history. The first part is the beginning of 1905, the beginning of the Constitutional Revolution, until 1911 or so. And the second part jumps a few decades into the 1920s, and that is a publication that we all are quite familiar with, Tawfiq magazine, which was extremely popular in Iran at the time. And she analyzes the role of cartoons in the political events and developments in Iran during these two important periods in Iran's modern history. So without any further ado, we turn it to Ms. Karimi.
Thank you very much for this lovely introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my presentation. But let's start from the beginning. So here's the title of my presentation, Political Cartoons in the Press of Two Eras, a cultural historical analysis of the selected examples from Mullah Nasreddin and Tawfiq. Here is a quick overview of my presentation. First comes Mullah Nasreddin, and I'll be examining the role of the important contributors. Then comes the character of Mullah Nasreddin, the legacy of the newspaper, and then in the end, and following that comes Tawfiq, its legacy, its staff, and censorship and closure. So the crucial role of the press in shaping public opinion by educating and providing information and also misinformation has always been the subject of many studies. However, the function of political humor in cartoons and caricatures has been partly neglected, which is why I would like to examine the question, what role did humor politics play after constitutional revolution in Iran until the Islamic Revolution in dealing with modernity, its conceptual influences, and what is the role of censorship in forming the content of these journals? To answer this question, I will examine these two journals, Mullah Nasreddin and Tawfiq, both of which were published immediately after Iran's constitutional revolution. The methodology that I will apply is content analysis, which is grounded in historical contextualization. So the first magazine is Mullah Nasreddin. Yeah. Mullah Nasreddin was published in South Caucasus, a region that is between the mountains in the north, the Black Sea to the west, and the Caspian Sea to the east, and also the Iranian plateau to the south. Currently, this area encompasses three republics of Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. So you can imagine that it was a mosaic of ethnic groups and religions. And in the early 20th century, the South Caucasus was primarily under the rule of the Russian Empire. Mullah Nasreddin, as an influential political and social weekly magazine, was published in Azeri Turkish from April 7, 1907 in Tbilisi, then briefly in Tabriz in 1921, and from 1922 to 1931 in Baku. This 8-page weekly significantly impacted journalism and the spread of ideas across Southern Caucasus, Persia, Turkey, and Central Asia. It was founded and edited by the renowned writer Dalil Muhammad Qolizadeh with the contribution of his friend Omar Faeq and financial support of Hamida Khanum. Mullah Nasreddin covered a wide array of social, political, and cultural issues in the Muslim world. It critiqued government corruption, autocracy, and colonialism, which also targeting religious hypocrisy and dogmatism. The magazine supported modernization, education reform, and women's rights, highlighting issues such as poverty, economic inequality, and exploitation. Here, I would like to focus on three important contributors of the magazine that are less known. The first one is Hamida Khanum. Hamida Khanum was an Azerbaijani activist and one of the first enlightened women of Azerbaijan. She was leading a modern, independent life. Although being a Muslim, she was unveiled, and she being unveiled was also the topic of many controversies. In South Caucasus, she organized plays, held fundraisers and benefits, and used the funds to support the education of impoverished girls and boys. The question is, how involved was she with the periodical? She routinely suggested topics about women's rights, women education, child marriage, domestic violence to the magazine. We don't know if she ever wrote articles under a pseudonym, but according to Issa Habibieli, she was always the first to read and to criticize the editorial board, articles and novels. She was widely read, an intellectual person in her own right, with a diverse set of interests from agriculture to medicine. And she was the person who made Mullah Nasreddin a pioneer of women's rights. Next, we get to Schmerling and Rother. In 1815, Caesar Alexander invited German peasants from Prussia, Austria, Switzerland to come and live in South Caucasus. These settlers, mainly Protestants supported by evangelical and Lutheran churches, also included small groups of German Catholics. They established their own schools, churches, and also sometimes they have their own beer gardens. One of those people was Oskar Schmerling. He was born in Stavropol in North Caucasus to a distinguished artistic family of German descent. He was influenced by Russian realism and worked in multiple art forms, including graphics and caricatures. He was also pioneer of Georgian caricature art. From 1906 to 1914, Schmerling and his artist friend Rother regularly published their caricatures in Mullah Nasreddin. Together, they contributed 600 caricatures and 1,200 illustrations to the magazine. And also you can see his signature, which is a circle on the tail of the fox. The second person was Joseph Rother. His background is unclear to us, but he was likely a German Jew who moved from Germany to this region. As said, Rother and Schmerling studied together at the Munich Academy of Arts in 1891. Schmerling invited Rother to join him, and they agreed becoming a teacher at the school. He cared about the same things as Schmerling cared. Joseph Rother worked for Mullah Nasreddin from 1906 to 1914. When the World War I began, he went back to Germany, and his paintings and cartoons are now kept in National Museum of Arts in Georgia. For the next 10 years, we don't have any further information of Rother. During the Weimar Republic, his name appears as a contributor to German books of fairy tales for children. After this date, there are no records of him, and it's unclear what happened exactly to him, leaving us to speculate that he might have been affected by the Nazis. The question is, who did they inspire from and how? The illustrations of Mullah Nasreddin were influenced by the Punch journalistic style, but they remained deeply committed to the left-wing political ideas of Spanish painter Francisco Goya, whose art responded to the Republican ideals of the French Revolution, and Russian artists of the 1905. And let's get to the character of Mullah Nasreddin himself. No need to say that choosing the legendary Nasreddin as a beloved figure in the folklore of the Middle East, Central Asia, Balkans, Southern Russia, and the whole area was a wise one. The humor in Nasreddin's story crosses ethnic, religions, and national lines, appealing to people of all ages and at times both genders. In Mullah Nasreddin, often Nasreddin would position himself beside a partially drawn curtain or behind a wall. He sneaked glimpses into people's lives and public events, exposing aspects usually hidden from public view. This allows the reader to become a voyeur alongside Nasreddin. At times, Nasreddin even turns his gaze toward us as the audience. He's employing the technique which is today known as breaking the fourth wall. If we want to place Mullah Nasreddin in this famous picture plane by Scott McCloud, we can place him somewhere here. His iconic figure in literature is drawn wisely and smartly non-iconically by the artist of Mullah Nasreddin. He is drawn namely realistically, and as we mentioned earlier, the style of the magazine was also very realistic. And finally, how censorship and political pressure affected Mullah Nasreddin. The 1917 Russian Revolution abruptly ended the Tsarist Russian Empire. Mirza Jalil and his wife Hamida Khanum, they kept their distance from the new government. They neither supported nor opposed the new government, likely because they did not trust the new leaders of the revolution. Starting on February 19, 1921, 8 new issues of the magazine was published in Tabriz, focusing on the city's social and economic problems. These issues quickly gained dedicated readers. Printing in Tabriz was also very difficult for them as a result of logistic challenges, first, and secondly, the negative reactions from the city officials, that they were not used to these critiques. In 1926, Mirza Jalil faced new challenges from Iran. The new king Reza Shah was unhappy with the articles and cartoons about him and also his government. Reza Shah sent an official complaint to the Soviet authorities in Azerbaijan, in Moscow, and then Moscow passed this complaint to the Communist Party of Azerbaijan, emphasizing that the Soviet regime wanted to maintain friendly relations with the Shah. So please take away these cartoons from the magazine. The second challenge was on April 9, 1929, the Azerbaijan Communist Party decided that the periodical would become the organ of the League of the Atheists and changed the name of the magazine from Mullah Nasreddin to Allahsiz, godless. In February 1930, Mirza Jalil asked the Central Committee to continue publishing Mullah Nasreddin under its original name. It's important here to notice that although Mullah Nasreddin criticized dogmatic religious beliefs, it never followed an atheistic policy. A few more issues were published as Mullah Nasreddin. However, after the death of Mirza Jalil in 1931 and early 1932, the publication continued under the name Allahsiz. And after some issues, it stopped publication. We can ask that what was the legacy of Mullah Nasreddin? Mullah Nasreddin had a wide legacy in the region, in the South Caucasus, and also in Iran. It had wide influence on magazines such as Bohlul, Zambur, Kelniyat, Leklek, and also in Iran, Hasharatul Arz, and also on the next magazine, which is called Tawfiq. Tawfiq was Iran's first regularly published satirical weekly. It was published in Tehran for almost 50 years between 1923 and 1971. Tawfiq experienced 3 discontinuous periods. The first period lasted from 1923 to 1940 and ended with the death of its founder, Hossein Tawfiq, on February 1994, who had just been released from prison following an accusation of espionage. The second phase began when the Muhammad Ali Tawfiq, the son of Hossein Tawfiq, inherited the license and editorship of Tawfiq, and it continued until the coup. The third period began on March 20, 1958, when the journal was first published under the name Fokahi, humorous, and later as Tawfiq by the founder's nephew Hassan Hossein and Abbas continued its publication. The publication continued with interruptions until 1971, when it finally closed by the censorship board. During this period, the magazine had a circulation of 35,000 and enjoyed a high level of popularity. Tawfiq was originally intended as a humorous and satirical magazine that appeared on 4 pages. It was only in its 5th year of publication that it was given permission to print caricatures. However, this humorous and slightly satirical phase was interrupted again from the beginning of 1932 until the spring of 1938 due to the reign of Reza Shah, and it became a literary magazine. In the last phase of its first period, Tawfiq once again became a non-political satirical magazine, which continued until the death of its founder in 1939 and resumed its work again in 1940. Tawfiq's publication of the early second period was indeed similar to the politics of Mullah Nasreddin. However, Tawfiq gradually moved away from this influence in the following years and developed its own style. The abdication of Reza Shah in September 1941 and the following period of freedom of press was a turning point in the life of Tawfiq. Tawfiq became very political in the 12 years of its second publication as a result of relaxation of law of press. It should also be noted that in several cartoons of this period, shortly before the coup of 1953, Mohammad Reza Shah is depicted rather negatively. In one of his early daring cartoons, Abbas Tawfiq depicts the Shah as a locust who is caught by a man after 2 failed attempts, and he uses this proverb. The man quotes a Persian proverb meaning, "I'll get you in the end." In the final years of the second period, Tawfiq continued to passionately advocate for liberal causes such as nationalization of oil and fishing industries. Social problems such as unemployment and high prices were also topics of the Tawfiq. In Nowruz 1958, under difficult political conditions and after the 1953 coup and under strict censorship, the new period began. After this new period, the newspaper was not allowed to interfere in politics. Mostly in the third period of its publication, Tawfiq criticized various cabinet members and prime minister. One of the targets of the satire of Tawfiq was the actions of Amir Abbas Hoveida, which Tawfiq referred to him by comical names such as Pesenjun, Badenjun, or Abbas, and Prime Minister Hoveida was almost present in most of the issues of the second and third period. As censorship intensified, the content became more satirical and less focused on social and political issues, and leaned toward light-hearted cartoons. By objectifying women. In the third period of Tawfiq's publication, apart from brief periods, press censorship always prevailed. Therefore, although the magazine refrained from attacking Mohammad Reza Shah or the royal family, it was finally banned in 1971. It is not known exactly what was the reason of the ban of Tawfiq. However, for example, Abbas Milani believes it is difficult to imagine that a newspaper as popular and as influential as Tawfiq could have been closed without the order of Mohammad Reza Shah. End quote. Major contributors of Tawfiq included Abulqasem Halat, Iraj Pezeshkzad, Parviz Khatibi, Omran Salahi, and Kiumars Saberi Fumani. However, we don't see in neither of the periods we come across women as fixed contributors. And finally, let's get back to the iconic character of Tawfiq. Hassan Tawfiq at the end of 1958 designed the main symbol of the newspaper, Tawfiq, which he is called Kaka Tawfiq, and like his predecessor Mullah Nasreddin, who chose the figure of Mullah Nasreddin as the symbol of magazine, Tawfiq used this figure as one of his permanent characters and also as a pseudonym for editorial articles. The iconic figure of Tawfiq was wisely less realistic, more abstract, which allows many readers to identify with him. Kaka Tawfiq has also have a wife named Gishnis Khanum, who is mostly quiet. She's very passive, and normally she's dressed traditionally. So if you want to place Kaka Tawfiq in this picture plane, he would be placed somewhere here. And finally, censorship significantly shaped the Tawfiq journal in Iran, influencing its content and also its impact. Despite censorship and facing government tensions, Tawfiq tried to solidify its legacy as a significant satirical voice in Iran. The legacy of Tawfiq inside Iran was periodicals such as Tanz o Karikatur or Bolaga, and outside Iran, it was a magazine called Tarjuman in Afghanistan. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mr. Nader Nasiri, and his focus will be on the novel by Simin Danishvar, Savushun, and it's a very deep analysis of that novel. Mr. Nasiri, we could begin his presentation.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Iran Academia, for providing us with such an invaluable opportunity again. The paper I'm going to present is a reading of Simin Daneshvar's Savushun. In reading Savushun's Political Unconscious to reconstruct the history from which it thrives and study its imaginary solutions for the social contradictions inherent in it, I have already put the novel within the frameworks of the first horizon, namely the political horizon of the three horizons Frederick Jameson devises in his methodology for scrutinizing a literary work. In that, I focused on the text itself. I dismantled the ambivalent structure of the narrative apparatus of the novel as composed of an epic and realist story, and by attributing them to the hero and the protagonist of the story, namely Yusuf and Zari, respectively, captured the ideological double-bind from which the novel suffers, that is, the opposition between courage and timidity. In the next step, to meditate on the history from which the text originates, such a system of antinomy was considered as, quote, the symptomatic expression and conceptual reflex of something quite different, namely a social contradiction, end quote. In this respect, I formulated the ideological contradiction of the novel as a vehicle for meditation on history as follows. Daneshvar, as a cultivated and educated woman from the pioneering middle class in the 1960s, facing and participating in the process of modernization, which, besides developing the country, is challenging its identity and working traditions, is bewildered by the question of how can one be brave enough to be determined to resist the greater powers and to maintain what they have inherited, and at the same time be flexible enough or not too stubborn to benefit from the necessary developments they can bring about to the country. In this article, I will pass from the first horizon to the second one, namely from the political to the social, by replacing the dialectical methodology for the previous semiological one. The object of study here, or the organizing categories of social class in terms of which the novel must be rewritten in this horizon, as Jameson designates it, is what would be called ideology. In what follows, I will read Savushun in terms of what a provincial middle class rising in the first Pahlavi era, which, although experienced the process of modernization and internalized standards of living, had not still faced the rapid social changes of the subsequent decades, had to say to both the lower classes and the middle class, which was emerging in the capital and the big cities in the 1960s. The major themes of alienation and spiritualism are the two ideologies this essay will touch upon in rewriting Savushun to construct its class position within the discourse of modernism and the decades of the 1960s and 70s. The concept of alienation will be considered as composed of two motifs of Vestoxification and materialism discernible in the story. Although these two motifs work well together, the latter is not necessarily implied in the former. In other words, although Vestoxification brings about the consumerism and the fetishism of commodity implied in the concept of materialism, it is not the sole cause of it. The distinction is crucial when reading the story, not as merely a tension between the inside and the outside, or the self and the other, but moreover, as a clash between those two more pervasive terms of the authentic and the unauthentic. Savushun is truly a novel in the sense that it is a process happening to its generic components. In Jameson's terms, it is a, quote, narrative mimesis or realistic representation, which is the systematic undermining and demystification, the secular decoding of those pre-existing inherited traditional or sacred narrative paradigms which are its initial givens, end quote. However, it does not demystify such genres and paradigms to discredit them, but to annihilate them in a dialectical synthesis to a higher level, that, at the formal level, be the novel itself or the very act of storytelling. In this sense, it is that the novel is so revealing to a reading of a positive hermeneutics or causality kind, the task of which is to, quote, seek a unified meaning to which the various levels and components of the work contribute in a hierarchical way, end quote. If there is one master code to which Savushun pays its due, that is the concept of home. The distinction between inner and outer spaces is mirrored in a kaleidoscopic style through the ever-widening settings of the story. As if it's not enough to depict a townhouse at the heart of a city reflecting a country in a semi-colonial condition, Daneshvar finds it necessary to make the children build a mud house when playing in the garden of the townhouse. The opposition between the private and the public, or between the self and the other, is what generates the one major contradiction of the novel, which is the opposition with the West. However, this geographical metaphor is doubled into a feminine framework when Zari's belly is pictured as a map. What makes it significantly different from the former is that this time it is not the map of Iran. Yusuf interprets Zari's belly with scars on it as the map of the earth. This twist is emblematic of the problem of the story, which is also doubled. On the one hand, we have that struggle between Iran and the West, and on the other, the story grapples with the issue of femininity, which, as I will argue, gives way to concerns and speculations about the human condition. I will show how the confluence of these two positionings extends the novel's object of criticism from a mere Westoxification to the other diagnosis named materialism, which, although related to the former, goes far beyond it in its connotations of lust, venality, liturgy, obsession with power, and ultimately the patriarchal Iranian tradition, customs, and ethics. In other words, I will discuss that the motif of Westoxification in the novel is at work with a similar but quite different motif of materialism to build up the ideology of alienation. Both issues of Iran-West opposition and femininity can be said to stem from the process of modernization, which was triggered long before the 1960s when the novel was written, both as something external to the Iranian society and as the idea of the modern subject. The long process of modernization in Iran reverberates with another phenomenon named westernization, emulation of the West as necessary to, quote, master their secrets and thus stand up to them, end quote, led to what is widely called dual society. The two exogenous sources of this dual society make finding a definite class basis for it difficult, if not impossible. On the one hand, Europeanization is a phenomenon imposed by the government, and on the other, it is a social process. The governmental regulations began in court life with Muhammad Shah's 1839 decree on men's adoption of European-style clothing. The second wave of governmental implication of Westernization happened with the severe interferences of Reza Shah in the first decades of the 20th century, and followed after a short 20-year period by his successor, his son, Mohammad Reza's manipulations in the 1960s when Daneshvar was writing Savushun. In this sense, the critique of Westernization was a means to oppose the nascent monarchy's dystopic rule over the country. Here, it has more of a political instrument in it than a social critique. As a social process, the emulation of the West resulted from both the new education system and the absorption of a stratum of society into Western culture due to close economic contact with their Western counterparts. The establishment of the Polytechnic School in 1851 and, as Ahmad Ashraf explains, the emergence of the modernizing merchant class in the late 19th century and its separation from the natural milieu of its operations, the bazaar communities, are emblematic of this social progress and at the same time bifurcation. Hushain Chahabi suggests using the terms cosmopolitan and local to refer to the modern middle class and the traditional strata respectively. As Chahabi further explains, quote, the contrast between the westernized Iranians who were somewhat alienated from their native culture and conservative Iranians whose minds were closed to the wider world, both in fact caricatures, became the subject of two of the best-known literary works in modern Persian prose, both published in 1921, end quote. Namely, these two works are The Persian is Sugar by Jamalzadeh and Master Jafar Returns from Europe by Hassan Muqaddam. These two modern works of literature problematize Iranians' encounter with the West, better to say Europe, in terms of a lack of understanding through satirical characterizations of the culture war in the dual society. Whatever their solutions, they take the encounter with the West as a part of the problem. However, there is another discourse in modern Persian literature for which this encounter is the source of inspiration for self-reflection and turning attention to the society with its traditions, customs, and history. Jamalzadeh has his other monumental Yeki Bud Yeki Nabud, Once Upon a Time, in this discourse. Savushun, as a novel whose ambition is to capture history, knits together all these accounts of the encounter with the West in its narrative apparatus. To designate the locus of any one of them in its texture, we should once again explore our construction of the novel as a historical novel composed of mythical and modern realist fiction. On the one hand, we have an epic, mythic narrative that is the locus of political events and depicts Iran's social formation in the 1920s. Although it accomplishes its mission by typifying characters and events, allegory is still the primary technique employed in this lined-up narrative. Yusuf, Khankaka, Mr. Futuhi, the city's ruler, the central government, the city's tribal formation, and the foreigners are the main actors in this narrative line. In this battlefield in the story, nationalism is at work as the other side of what Daneshvar diagnoses as Westoxification. It is important that the story is not shown by narration. It is told through allegorical, in cases symbolic, elements that work as pieces on a chessboard. The only narrative we are given at this level is the story of the semi-Rome event, in which we clearly see the author's sympathy with the forces of the national governmental army against the weaponized tribes. Encounter with the West is defined at this political level in its oppositional mode as something which toxifies, and corrupts the natives' ethics and leads them to disparity and defeat. Westoxification here is the yardstick to evaluate whatever threatens Iran's sovereignty, be it a state which compromises it with foreigners or the weaponized tribes who are deceived by the West and simply make the wrong decision. I will later show that Shi'i religion and nationalism are at work in this line of story, and not as the novel solution to Daneshvar's broader diagnosis, which is alienation. On the other hand, however, what makes Savushun a novel is the narrative apparatus that distances itself from the third-person narrator's voice as the classic storyteller and proceeds when the point of view becomes that of the Zari, especially in her interior dialogues and reminiscences, and also in the reminiscences of other characters, mainly female. In this narrative line, the object of criticism of the novel goes beyond that of the opposition between Iran and the West, or any other kind of identity problem, or the issue of nationalism and sovereignty. Here, modernization is not a phenomenon the same as westernization in the toxic sense of the word. It is a necessity that must be fulfilled, an approach that provides the author with a self-reflective outlook, enabling her to evaluate the tradition and at the same time a phenomenon that has its inherent drawbacks. In the former sense, the emergence of the modern subject is the main cause in the novel of giving voice to women, primarily through Zari and also in other female characters in the story. With the latter sense comes all the critique on modernization as nihilism and also as its concomitant capitalism with its consumerism and fetishism of commodities. In other words, in this narrative line, Daneshvar takes the Janusian face of modernity to criticize both the Iranian patriarchal tradition and culture and the human condition under the rule of capitalism, which indeed finds its affinities with unpleasant aspects of Iranian mores. It is to this latter problem that Daneshvar prescribes spiritualism, albeit not in the sense of Shiism or nationalism, but in the form of a kind of cosmopolitan mysticism. Hence, in the next step, I shall explore the novel's utopic aspects, not least to explain its diagnosis further.
Again, I was simply thanking our two speakers, but I had one question, Ms. Karimi. I wonder if you're familiar with the work of Ardeshir Mohassez, who was a major contributor to Tawfiq, and then he became really an internationally recognized Iranian graphic artist. And if you would like to comment on it.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, in my master dissertation, there was one chapter that I wrote about Ardeshir Mohassez. Yes. But however, I thought that maybe it's too much here, or maybe we exceed the time. Therefore, I didn't mention him as one of the most influential cartoonists of Tawfiq. But true, yeah, he started not he didn't start, but he was very he had many works in Tawfiq.
And then, of course, as I think you might agree, he really became the most notable Iranian graphic artist for the rest of the century.
True.
So one quick question. To what extent do you see a close connection between Simin Daneshvar and Jalal al-Ahmad? Particularly, I think you mentioned a number of times about his, westernization or West-struckness and so on in this novel. Do you see that as a reflection of Al-Ahmad's work and position on her, or do you think she may have arrived at that on her own?
Really, I cannot say whether it is the direct influence of Al-Ahmad on Daneshvar or not, but it's clear that this idea, which comes originally authentically from Fardid, Ahmad Fardid, and then Al-Ahmad formulates it in his Westoxification pamphlet, we can say, not a book. And then maybe Simi Daneshvar, who was closely related to the circle, just borrowed the idea. But the thing I want to say in this reading of Savushun is that this is just part of the theme of the story. And that there are other readings, there are other motifs and themes which are related to this theme, but are not the same as this theme of Westoxification and this opposition between Iran and the West.
I thought you developed that really very well, that the novel includes a number of other themes that are not necessarily a reflection of or even related to the Westoxification theme, but that is simply one of several themes that appear in the novel. Yeah, and it became, of course, the most dominant theme in the intellectual discourse of the 1960s and 1970s.
Yes, I think it's a very patriarchal reading of the novel. There is also a feminine reading of the novel, which is from Zari's point of view, and it's not necessarily supporting the idea of opposition between Iran and the West. It is mainly focused on the human condition, and it is mainly focused on rethinking and refocusing on our own morals and ethics, and to see the drawbacks and the weak points in it.
With that said, I would like to again thank our two speakers on behalf of our audience and myself. Many, many thanks.